At the grocery store, my daughter-in-law told the clerk. That old woman is the maid. Don't talk to her. My son and grandson burst out laughing. They had no idea I owned the store. That same afternoon, I canceled the inheritance. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story through to the end, and leave a comment with your city so I can see how far the truth travels. I should have known something was off when Meadow insisted on coming grocery shopping with us. She rarely did anything that didn't benefit her directly. But there she was, flawless at 10 a.m., her blonde hair swept into an elegant bun, expensive sunglasses pushed up like a headband, and a designer purse clenched tightly in her manicured hands. Come on, Grandma Bessie, my grandson Judd called from the backseat of Blaine's SUV. We're getting ice cream after. At 70, I still felt a quiet joy whenever Judd included me. Those moments had become rare. I climbed into the back seat beside him, my joints stiff with age, trying to mask the effort it took. Meadow glanced back at me with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. Try not to embarrass us in there, she said under her breath. Just loud enough for me to hear, soft enough that Blaine, my own son, wouldn't catch it. I said nothing. I'd learned over the years that responding only gave her more fuel. Blaine always took her side anyway. The store was unusually busy for a Tuesday. Young parents wrangling toddlers, retirees strolling slowly through the aisles, a few professionals grabbing lunch ingredients. I'd been shopping at Morrison's Market for over 3 decades, long before Meadow knew my son even existed. The shelves, the smells, the people, they usually comforted me. Not today. Meadow took command of the cart with the precision of a drill sergeant, moving briskly down each aisle, checking items off her list. Judd stayed close to her, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I hoped was affection, though it may have just been polite tolerance. At checkout, I felt a familiar knot tighten in my chest. The cashier, a young man no older than 20, smiled warmly as we approached. His eyes met mine. Good morning, ma'am. How are you doing today? I opened my mouth to reply, but Meadow cut in sharply, stepping between us. This old woman is the maid. Don't talk to her. It hit me like a slap. I stood frozen, air catching in my throat. My cheeks burned. The young man's smile faltered. His gaze darted to me, then back to Meadow, confusion clear in his eyes. But before anyone could say another word, Blaine, my son, my flesh and blood, let out a laugh. A deep, unbothered, belly laugh. As if what Meadow had said was the punchline of a brilliant joke. Judd joined in, his 12-year-old voice chiming through the checkout lane. Yeah, Grandma's like our maid, he giggled, parroting something he'd clearly heard before. My fingers tightened around the worn strap of my purse, knuckles bone white. The cashier's expression shifted again, this time to pity. And somehow, that was worse. He didn't speak to me again. Paper or plastic? He asked Meadow, voice flatter now. Plastic, she said with a smugness that made my stomach turn. People in line were watching. Some looked embarrassed for me. Others seemed entertained. I wanted to vanish. To evaporate into the floor and leave this moment behind forever. But the worst part wasn't the embarrassment. It was the quiet horror of realizing my family, the people I'd loved, raised, sacrificed everything for, no longer saw me as human. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a grandmother. I wasn't even worth basic courtesy. I was the help. Back in the parking lot, Meadow latched onto Blaine's arm, chatting about dinner reservations. Judd skipped ahead, having already forgotten everything. I trailed behind, carrying the bags like some burden they didn't even notice. No one mentioned the ice cream. No one asked if I was okay. The ride home was silent on my end. I sat in the backseat like cargo, while Meadow planned a spa weekend and Blaine talked about his upcoming golf game. When we got home, I carried their groceries into the kitchen. They disappeared into their rooms without a word. That's when I made my decision. They thought I was weak. They thought I was dependent. They had no idea who I really was. But they were about to find out. I put everything away on autopilot, my hands moving while my mind sat frozen in the wreckage of the day. Numb. Hurt. Hollow. This was my life. This was what I had become. But as I stood alone in that too quiet kitchen, something deep inside me stirred. Not anger, not yet. But the whisper of a question I hadn't allowed myself to ask in years. Is this really the life I deserve? The silence in my bedroom felt heavier than usual. I didn't even change out of my clothes, still wearing what I had on at Morrison's Market, stiff with shame. I sat on the edge of my bed like a ghost trapped in her own story, unable to move forward, unable to look away from the loop replaying in my mind. This old woman is the maid. Meadow's voice echoed louder each time. But it wasn't just her cruelty that haunted me. It was Blaine's laugh. My son. The boy I held as a baby, the boy I worked 3 jobs to feed after his father left. He laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. A full, careless laugh. I glanced around my bedroom, really saw it for the first time in a long while. The smallest room in the house. Barely enough space for a twin bed and a dresser. 5 years ago, when Meadow moved in, she suggested I take this room, so they could have the master. It just makes sense, she'd said, wearing that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. We need the space for our things. And like always, I'd agreed. It was easier than arguing. Easier than being labeled difficult or ungrateful. After all, they were letting me live here, weren't they? At least, that's how Meadow liked to frame it. Never mind that I'd lived here for 15 years before she ever walked through the front door. I caught my reflection in the narrow mirror above the dresser. A woman stared back who barely looked like me. When did I become so small? When did I start apologizing just for existing? My gray hair pulled back in the same no-nonsense bun. Clothes neat but worn, chosen for practicality, not pride. I looked exactly like what Meadow had called me. The help. But I wasn't always like this. There was a time I had purpose. I closed my eyes and tried to find her, the woman I used to be. Before Frank left. Before Blaine got married. Before I learned that staying quiet kept the peace. I used to run a small catering business, right from this kitchen. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. People loved my pot roast. My apple pie had regulars who'd book weeks in advance. But when Meadow arrived, she said it was inappropriate. Embarrassing. She told Blaine it wasn't safe to have strangers in and out. Said I needed to retire. One by one, she found reasons for me to stop. Too much noise. Too much mess. Too disruptive to their lives. Within a year of her moving in, my business was gone. And with it, my freedom. My identity. I became what Meadow wanted me to be. A live-in housekeeper. Babysitter. A body in the background, working for room and board. But tonight, sitting in the dark of my little room, I remembered something I'd buried under years of routine and silence. I walked to the closet and pushed aside the old coats and out-of-season dresses. There it was. A small safe, tucked in the far corner. Dusty, but solid. My hands trembled as I turned the dial. The combination was the day Frank left us. Not out of pain, but survival. That was the day I learned to fend for myself. Inside were documents. Ones Meadow and Blaine knew nothing about. Bank records. Investment summaries. Property deeds. After Frank left, I made a promise to myself, I would never be vulnerable again. Every extra penny from catering, every gift from distant relatives, every smart investment, I kept track of it all. I built a life they didn't even know existed. I pulled out the most recent statements and laid them on the bed, reading them under the lamplight. It turns out, I hadn't just survived. I'd thrived. 3 rental properties. A diversified portfolio. And yes, 40% ownership of Morrison's Market, the very store where I was humiliated that morning. Bill Morrison, the original owner, had been one of my catering clients. When he needed capital to expand, I invested quietly in exchange for a stake. It was all legal. All documented. I never told Blaine or Meadow. Why would I? The moment I showed any sign of independence, Meadow saw it as a threat. The one time I mentioned some savings, she had a list of house expenses I could help with. The time I said I owned a small rental, she suggested I sell it to fund Judd's college. So, I stayed quiet. Let them believe I was helpless. Dependent. That I needed them. It kept the peace. But at what cost? Because tonight, with the evidence of my life spread out in front of me, I realized something painful. I hadn't just sacrificed my dignity. I had sacrificed myself. But not anymore. I'd sacrificed myself. The woman who had built this quiet empire of investments and properties wasn't weak or helpless. She was strategic. Resilient. Sharp. A woman who deserved respect, certainly not one who should be dismissed as the maid by her own family. I gently returned the documents to the safe but left it open a moment longer than necessary. Tomorrow, I'd make a few calls. Visit some offices I hadn't stepped foot in for years. Start remembering who I really was. Beneath the years of shrinking myself to fit into the role they needed me to play. Later that night, as I changed into my nightgown and caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw something different. Not a victim. Not a ghost. A woman who had been acting for so long, she'd nearly forgotten it was all just a role. But every performance ends. And mine was nearly over. 3 days after the grocery store incident, I was returning from my afternoon walk when I heard voices floating from the living room. The front door stood slightly ajar. Meadow's laugh rang out, too loud, too bright. She was entertaining again. Which meant I was supposed to vanish until her guests were gone. I moved toward the stairs, ready to retreat. Then I heard my name. Something in her voice stopped me cold, sharp, sarcastic, almost gleeful. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can stand having her around, Meadow said. I froze, one hand gripping the banister. She shuffles through this place like a ghost. Always underfoot. Can't you just put her in a home? A stranger's voice responded. One of her new book club friends, probably. I didn't recognize it. Meadow laughed again, low and cruel. Oh, believe me, I've looked into it. But Blaine always gets sentimental. Says, we can't just abandon his poor old mother. She added a mocking edge to the words that made my stomach twist. What he doesn't understand is that she's the one abandoning us, by being such a burden. My legs went weak. I pressed myself against the wall, out of sight, heart pounding in my ears. Besides, Meadow went on, more quietly now, we're just waiting for the inheritance situation to resolve itself, if you know what I mean. I stopped breathing. Blaine thinks she might have a few savings tucked away. Maybe some kind of life insurance policy. It'd be foolish to move her out before we know what we're dealing with. Another voice chimed in, Sandra. I knew her. She'd hugged me at holidays. How much longer could it be, really? She's what, 70? She looks older. Meadow sighed. That's the problem. She's healthier than she looks. Could live another 10 years for all we know. Meanwhile, I'm stuck playing nursemaid to someone who contributes nothing to this household. The ease of her cruelty stunned me. I'd always known she didn't like me, but hearing her talk about my death like it was a pending transaction, that was something else entirely. What does she even do all day? Sandra asked. Oh, she keeps busy, Meadow said, voice thick with sarcasm. Cooking, cleaning, watching Judd when we need her to. Free labor. I suppose there are some benefits to having her around, but really, the negatives outweigh the positives at this point. Footsteps approached. I backed away from the kitchen, my shoes silent on the hardwood. I slipped up the stairs and into my room, heart hammering, every breath tight and shallow. I sank onto the bed. They were waiting for me to die. Not praying for my health. Not grateful for my presence. Waiting. Calculating. Plotting a future where I was conveniently gone. And Blaine. My son. The boy I raised to be gentle and fair. He wasn't just aware of these conversations. He was part of them. They thought they knew everything about me, my bank account, my usefulness, my worth. But they were wrong. They had no idea that the woman they wanted to discard was capable of changing every single one of their lives with a single phone call. Later that evening, after Meadows' guests had gone and the house fell into its usual routine, I made dinner. As I always did. Blaine scrolled through his phone, eating with one hand. Meadow picked at her food, more interested in her social media feed than the meal. Judd wolfed his plate down and disappeared upstairs. "This chicken's a little dry," Meadow said, still not looking at me. "Maybe less seasoning next time." I nodded silently. The chicken was moist. Perfectly cooked. But this had nothing to do with the food, and everything to do with control. It was her way of putting me back in my place. As I cleared the dishes, they chatted about the weekend ahead. A wine tasting for Meadow. A fishing trip for Blaine. And, of course, Judd would stay with me, because no one ever asked me if I had plans. Then, Blaine spoke, his first words to me all evening. "Mom," he said casually, "Meadow and I are thinking about getting the house painted this spring. We'll need you to pack up your room so the painters can get in there." Not a question. Not a discussion. An order, wrapped in politeness. Of course, I replied automatically. "Whatever you need." Meadow gave a satisfied smile. "It shouldn't take more than a day or two," she said. "You can sleep on the couch in the basement while they're working." I smiled back. Small. Polite. The kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. Because while they were painting walls, I'd be quietly repainting the future. Not theirs. Mine. The basement couch was old, lumpy, with a spring that pressed into my hip whenever I shifted. They knew this. Of course they did. It was just one more small cruelty. One more silent message. Your comfort doesn't matter. Later that night, long after the house had gone still, I sat alone in the kitchen. The dishes were clean, stacked neatly in the cabinets. The floor was spotless. Everything in its place, except me. For years, I convinced myself that family meant sacrifice. That love required patience. Silence. Endurance. That enduring whatever treatment I was given was part of being a good mother. But what I heard today wasn't love. It wasn't even kindness. It was strategy. They were planning around my death. And that kind of cold calculation doesn't grow from love. It grows from entitlement. From the belief that I had nothing left to offer. That I was invisible. Finished. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I thought about the bank accounts they'd never seen. The properties. The partnership in Morrison's Market, the very place where Meadow made a scene, not knowing she was doing it in front of one of the owners. All these years, I'd hidden my independence like something shameful. As if strength was something to apologize for. Maybe it was time to stop apologizing. Maybe it was time to remind everyone, including myself, exactly who I was. Not just Blaine's mother. Not just the woman on the couch. My name is Bessie. And I built a life far bigger than the box they tried to keep me in. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Meadow and Blaine slept in, and Judd got ready for school, I quietly slipped out of the house and walked the 6 blocks to downtown. My first stop, Morrison's Market. It looked the same as always, early morning deliveries, sleepy-eyed cashiers clocking in. But this time I didn't walk through the doors as someone humiliated. I walked in as someone with skin in the game. Someone with ownership. I passed the produce section, the shelves I once helped stock during the early expansion. I remembered the long nights Bill Morrison and I spent going over numbers, planning out every aisle. This store wasn't just a business to me. It was proof of who I really was, quietly powerful, quietly capable. Bill was in his office behind the customer service counter, hunched over a stack of invoices. At 68, he looked more tired than I remembered, but when he saw me, his face lit up. "Bessie! What brings you by so early?" I sank into the chair across from him, more at ease than I'd felt in months. "I want to talk business," I said. "It's been too long." His expression sobered. "Everything okay? You sound different." "I've been silent too long," I said. "It's time I took a more active role in the store. No more watching from the sidelines." He leaned back, eyes studying me. "What are you thinking?" "For starters, I want to revisit our staffing policies, especially around customer service. And I'd like an office. A real one. Somewhere I can keep an eye on daily operations." For the next hour, we combed through financial reports, staffing charts, and operational plans. To my surprise, but not really, Bill was completely on board. "Honestly," he said, "I've been hoping you'd want to get more involved. Retirement's not far off, and you've always had better instincts than I do when it comes to people." As our meeting wound down, I hesitated. Then said, "There's one more thing. I need to make some changes to my will. And my succession plans." Bill's gaze sharpened slightly. He'd known me a long time, long enough to read between the lines. "You need someone discreet." I nodded. "Someone sharp. Someone who doesn't ask too many personal questions." "Sarah Mitchell," he said immediately. "Handled everything for my family. You'll like her." I walked the 4 blocks to Sarah Mitchell's office just before lunch. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, dressed in a crisp navy suit, her energy calm but focused. She listened carefully as I explained my situation, not interrupting, not judging. When I finished, she sat still for a long moment. "How long has your family been treating you this way?" she asked softly. "It's been getting worse over the past 5 years, since my daughter-in-law moved in." I paused, then added, "But if I'm honest, I let it happen. I thought being silent was the same as keeping the peace." She nodded thoughtfully. "What you're describing, it sounds like financial abuse. Even if they don't know the extent of your assets, they're making decisions about your life without your input. That's not just unkind, it's dangerous." She pulled out a legal pad and clicked her pen. "Let's start with your current will. Who are your beneficiaries?" "My son, Blaine, is the primary. A small bequest for my grandson, Judd. A few charitable donations." "And you want to change that?" I took a breath. "Yes. I want to remove Blaine entirely. I want to create a trust for Judd. He can access it when he turns 25, if he maintains a relationship with me based on respect, not obligation. And I want to significantly increase my charitable giving." Sarah scribbled notes, her face unreadable but respectful. "And the business?" "I'll maintain control for as long as I'm alive," I said. "But I'm open to revisiting the succession plan, on my terms." She nodded slowly. "You've been underestimated for a long time, haven't you?" I smiled, not bitter, not angry. Just ready. "Yes," I said. "But that ends now. Maybe employee ownership. Maybe selling my shares back to Bill. Maybe something else entirely." What I knew for certain was this. I wasn't handing over control of businesses I built to people who neither understood them nor valued the work that created them. Sarah and I spent 2 hours discussing options, trust structures, asset protections, and a full estate overhaul. She explained that the legal changes would take a few weeks to finalize, but she could begin drafting everything immediately. As I stood to leave, I paused. "There's one more thing," I said. "I want complete confidentiality. No one in my family can know about these changes until everything is signed and secured." She nodded. "Of course. Attorney-client privilege protects everything we discuss. But Bessie, may I offer some personal advice?" I nodded. Don't let fear of their reaction stop you from protecting yourself. You have every right to rethink your legacy. Especially if the people set to inherit it are treating you with anything less than respect. Your money is yours. Your life is yours. I walked home lighter than I'd felt in years. For the first time since Meadow had moved in, I wasn't just enduring. I was acting. I was remembering that I had choices, power they'd simply assumed I'd forgotten how to use. When I walked through the door, Meadow was in the kitchen blending a smoothie. She glanced up, frowning. Where were you? I needed you to watch Judd this morning. You just vanished. I had errands to run, I replied evenly, setting down my purse. Errands? She squinted. What kind of errands? Business matters, I said, walking past her to start lunch. Business? She let out a short, skeptical laugh. What business could you possibly have? Personal affairs, I said simply, beginning to chop vegetables. She stared at me, suspicious and irritated, waiting for more. But I didn't offer any. Her confusion didn't bother me. Not this time. In fact, I found it almost amusing. She was so certain she knew everything about me. So confident in her assumption that I was just an old woman with no resources and no life beyond her kitchen. Bessie, she said sharply. Her tone carried a warning. I asked you a question. I looked up, meeting her eyes, really meeting them, for the first time in years. My voice was calm, clear. I had personal business to attend to. Something in my tone unsettled her. She stepped back slightly, her smoothie forgotten. Well, she muttered after a beat, flustered, next time, let someone know where you're going. We worry when you just disappear. I nearly laughed. The same woman who'd spent yesterday afternoon speculating about my death was now worried about my whereabouts. I'll keep that in mind, I said, turning back to the cutting board. As I prepared lunch, I thought about the documents Sarah was drafting. The office I'd soon take over again at Morrison's Market. All the changes quietly set in motion. Meadow and Blaine had no idea that their comfort was built on a foundation that could shift at any moment. But I did. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. 2 weeks passed. The legal documents were finally ready. In those quiet days, I watched my family with new eyes. Every dismissive comment. Every command disguised as a question. Every time they treated me like a servant rather than someone they lived with. And with each moment, my resolve only deepened. This morning felt different. There was a tension in the air, like the stillness before a storm. I made breakfast as usual. Set the table. Poured the coffee. They ate without thanks. Blaine scrolled through his phone. Meadow plotted out her errands aloud. Judd bolted out the door to catch his bus. Then, at exactly 10 o'clock, a knock came at the front door. Meadow looked up from her magazine, instantly irritated. Are you expecting someone? She asked, as if any visitor could only be mine, and therefore, a nuisance. I'll get it, I said, smoothing my apron. On the porch stood Sarah Mitchell, polished, composed, and holding a leather briefcase. Beside her was a younger man I didn't recognize. Good morning, Mrs. Harrison, she said, warm but professional. I'm here with the documents we discussed. Before I could respond, Meadow appeared behind me, drawn by the presence of someone she hadn't invited. Who is this? She asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. This is my attorney, I said calmly. Sarah Mitchell. And I believe she has something for me. Sarah gave a courteous nod and opened her briefcase, pulling out a thick envelope. The paperwork is complete, fully executed and filed, she said. Everything is in place. I reached for it with steady hands. Behind me, Meadow stood frozen in the doorway, her curiosity slowly blooming into something more dangerous, unease. And I didn't say a word to reassure her. And this is James Morrison, Sarah said, stepping slightly to the side. Bill Morrison's son, and the attorney overseeing the business transfer paperwork. Business transfer? Meadows' voice pitched up. What business transfer? I took the envelope from Sarah, its weight grounding me. Years of quiet investments. A lifetime of underestimation. And more planning than they could ever imagine, had all led here. Why don't we all sit down? I said gently, gesturing toward the living room. Blaine appeared from the kitchen, drawn by the unfamiliar voices and shift in energy. His eyes darted from the attorneys to the envelope in my hand. Mom, he asked, settling beside Meadow on the couch. What's going on? I stayed standing. The envelope remained unopened. I thought it was time you both knew the truth about our family's financial situation. Meadow narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? I looked at her calmly. 3 weeks ago, you called me the maid in front of strangers, I said, voice low but steady. You laughed when a cashier disrespected me, and you've spent years treating me like a burden. Like my only value was the unpaid labor I quietly offered. Mom, Blaine started, but I raised a hand. Let me finish. I turned to Meadow. Last week, I overheard you chatting with your friends, talking about how much longer you'd have to deal with me. Wondering what small scraps of inheritance might be left when I'm finally gone. Color flooded her face. You were eavesdropping, in my own house? Yes, I said simply. And what I heard made one thing very clear. You have no idea who I am. I opened the envelope and pulled out the top document. This is formal notice, I said, holding it up, that both of you have been removed from my will. Meadows' face froze. Judd will receive a trust fund when he turns 25, assuming he learns to treat me with basic decency. Everything else will go to charity. Blaine went pale. Mom, you can't be serious. We're family. And family, I said evenly, doesn't treat people the way you've treated me. I turned to James. Go ahead. Tell them about Morrison's Market. He stepped forward, flipping open his briefcase. Mrs. Harrison owns 40% of Morrison's Market, he said. She's been a silent partner for 15 years. As of yesterday, she assumed an active management role. Meadows' mouth parted in disbelief. No. That's impossible. She doesn't have money. James continued without pause. She also holds controlling interest in 3 additional grocery stores in the county, owns 4 rental properties downtown, and operates a property management firm overseeing 12 commercial buildings. The room went still. I watched as the assumptions unraveled, years of condescension collapsing under the weight of reality. Blaine finally broke the silence. How much? He asked, voice barely audible. How much are we talking about? Sarah glanced at her notes. Liquid assets, business equity, and real estate combined. A conservative estimate, $47 million. Meadow made a choked sound, like the air had been knocked from her chest. Her manicured fingers dug into the couch arm. $47 million, she repeated, stunned. You've had $47 million this whole time? I had the foundation for it, I corrected. And I built the rest, bit by bit. While you treated me like background noise. While you whispered about nursing homes and waited for me to leave you a modest little nest egg. Blaine stood abruptly and paced to the window, running a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? Think what? I cut in. That you were doing me a favor by letting me stay here? That I owed you gratitude for your crumbs of attention? Meadows' voice cracked as she tried to recover. We would have treated you differently if we'd known. Exactly, I said, my voice soft but cutting. You would have treated me differently because of my money, not because I'm a person worthy of respect. I let that hang in the air. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. There was a pause. Then Sarah stepped forward, professional and composed. There's one final item, she said. Mrs. Harrison has also purchased this home, from you, Mr. Harrison. Your mortgage was officially transferred to her company as of yesterday, James said. You have 30 days to secure alternative living arrangements. The devastation on their faces was complete. Blaine slumped into a chair, burying his head in his hands. Meadow just stared at me, eyes wide, lips parted, like I'd suddenly revealed myself to be someone unrecognizable. "You can't do this," she whispered. "This is our home. Judd's home." "This was my home first," I said, calm and measured. "I've lived here for 22 years. You've been here for 5. And in those 5 years, you've made it abundantly clear that I wasn't welcome." I slid the documents back into their envelope, feeling lighter with every motion. "The attorneys will take care of the details," I added. "I'll be staying at a hotel downtown until I finalize my next steps." I turned toward the staircase. "Mom, please," Blaine called, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can change." I paused at the bottom step. But I didn't turn around. "I'm 70, Blaine. I don't have time left to wait for you to figure out how to love me properly." 6 months later. I sat on the terrace of my villa, high above Lake Como, watching morning light melt across the Italian Alps in shades of rose and gold. The espresso in my hand was warm and perfect, served in delicate porcelain by Elena, my housekeeper, who treated me with a natural grace and respect I'd almost forgotten existed. The transition hadn't been instant. After walking out of Blaine and Meadows' house, I spent 3 weeks in a downtown hotel while Sarah's team conducted a full audit of my holdings. The final number surprised even me. $50 million. Half a century of quiet investing, compound growth, and smart business decisions had added up to something I'd never truly calculated. I'd underestimated myself, just as they always had. With Sarah's help, I sold the grocery stores to the employees through a generous buyout program. The rental properties were transferred to a management firm with instructions to keep rents affordable for working families. I kept only what I needed, for peace, not power. Choosing Italy had been easy. I'd dreamed of traveling the world, but life, responsibilities, had always come first. Now, nothing stood in the way. The villa wasn't flashy. Just right. 3 bedrooms with French doors that opened to overflowing gardens. A library filled with books I finally had time to read. A kitchen where I cooked simply because it made me happy, not because anyone expected it. A soft knock came at the terrace door. Elena stepped out, holding the cordless phone. "Signora Bessie," she said with a small smile. "A call from America. A young man, Judd. My grandson had called every week since I left. At first, he was angry. Then confused. Then, curious. Now, our conversations were filled with something like understanding." "Grandma?" His voice was deeper now, adolescence catching up with him. "How are you?" "I'm wonderful, sweetheart," I said. "How are things at home?" There was a pause. "Different," he said. "Mom and Dad are getting divorced. She moved out last month." I wasn't surprised. Without the illusion of an inheritance to anchor them, there wasn't much left. Meadow had likely found a new target, someone else to charm, someone else to drain. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. "Yeah. I think so. Dad's been asking about you a lot. He wants to call you." "And what do you think about that?" I asked, my voice warm, steady. There was another pause, longer this time. "I think he's finally starting to realize just how badly he messed up," Judd said. "But I also think he's only sorry because he found out about the money." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. At 13, Judd was already showing a depth of emotional awareness his parents had never come close to. "And what about you?" I asked gently. "Are you sorry because of the money, or because of how we treated each other?" "I'm sorry I laughed at you that day in the store," he said quietly. "I knew it was wrong, even then. But I wanted Mom and Dad to think I was funny. It was stupid." My throat tightened. "Thank you for saying that, Judd. That means more than you know." "Grandma," he said hesitantly, "could I maybe come visit you sometime?" Not because of the money or anything. Just because I miss you. I looked out over the still lake, where a small boat was gliding across the water, leaving ripples behind like brushstrokes on glass. I would love that, I said, smiling. But only when you're old enough to travel on your own. And only if you're coming for the right reasons. I am. I just want to see where you live now. Dad showed me some pictures online. It looks beautiful. After we hung up, I sat in silence, letting the conversation settle in my heart. Judd was the one bright light that had come out of those painful years with Blaine and Meadow. He was still young, still capable of growth, of becoming better than the people who raised him. Maybe one relationship could still be saved from the wreckage. Blaine had called countless times, but I never answered. The messages relayed through Judd were always some variation of the same theme. He was sorry. He'd changed. He wanted to make things right. But I'd heard those words before, always when he needed something. This time, the only difference was the size of the need. Later that morning, Elena returned with a silver tray, fresh fruit and the day's mail balanced neatly. Among the letters was one envelope I recognized immediately. Meadows looping, dramatic handwriting. I nearly tossed it out unopened. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside were 3 handwritten pages, full of contradiction. Pleas and threats, tangled together. She demanded help with her legal fees. Threatened to keep Judd from visiting me. Promised she'd change, if I reconsidered the will. Then accused me of destroying the family out of spite. I folded the letter, carried it to the stone fireplace in the sitting room, and fed it to the flames. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. That afternoon, I strolled through the village market, practicing my Italian with the local vendors. They greeted me with warm smiles and familiar affection. Senora Martinez insisted I take extra roses for my dining table. Yeppy the baker set aside the freshest loaves just for me. None of them knew about my fortune or my past. They liked me simply because I was kind. And I liked them for the same reason. This, I realized, is what family is supposed to feel like. Easy. Welcoming. Free of conditions or expectations. That evening, I called my financial advisor in New York. We discussed my latest contributions. A foundation for elderly people neglected by their families. Scholarships for single mothers launching their own businesses. A fund to help those escaping toxic home situations. My wealth was finally doing what it was always meant to, reflecting my values, not rewarding people who'd failed to value me. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the lake in brilliant hues of orange and violet, I raised my glass of wine in quiet celebration. To second chances. To late-blooming independence. To the radical act of choosing yourself when no one else will. I was 70 years old. And finally, living. 6 months ago, they called me the maid in a grocery store. Today, I live like the queen I always was inside. And the best part? This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning. Now I'm curious about you, the one who's been listening to my story. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you been through something like this? Let me know in the comments below. And before you go, I'm leaving 2 more stories on the screen. They're channel favorites, and trust me, they'll surprise you. Thanks for watching, until the very end.